Hello guys, hope you're well. It's Stu Sensei, your British English teacher, here with a great video for you. Today I'm with my friend Dan from BritSpeak, and we are talking about small talk, how to do it and how to start it up so that you can use it effectively in your everyday life so you can speak more English. Let's get into it. Hello everyone, nice to see you. It's Stu Sensei here, your British English teacher, with another British English teacher with me today. It's Dan Sensei. So today we
Dan
are.
Sensei? What decade is it?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was the man formerly known as Dan Sensei, we should say. So he's Prince 2.0. So
Just a symbol.
yeah, sorry, yes. So Dan from BritSpeak, should I say? I need to learn the branding, of course. Sorry to offend your branding officer. But yeah, I have Dan with me today, and today we're going to have a little chat about how to do better when you're speaking to people, having small talk or feeling more confident to speak anyway. Dan has some great tips. Actually, he's just recently ran a seminar on this, so we can learn a lot from him on this topic, I think, and I'll chip in with some tidbits as well as we go. So anyway, Dan, first of all, introduce where you're from, because I think that's always a good thing to do at the beginning.
Yeah. Cheers, mate. My name is Dan. I'm from Sheffield in England, which is up north. It's a bit different up there. It's a bit, as they say, grim up north. But I've been living in Japan since 2016, teaching British English and communication skills and all that good stuff. So yeah, nice to meet you. Not
Fantastic.
used to. Nice to meet them who's watching. I already know
Not
you.
me. I'm very disappointed. I feel sad. No, so yeah, of course, you've been teaching for a long time. Me too,
Yeah.
nearly 10 years, and yourself as well. So maybe over 10 years. So for speaking in Japan, for many people who are Japanese who are trying to learn English and learning how to communicate, actually speaking is probably the more difficult thing to do. Of the four main topics, like reading, listening, uh,
Writing.
dead writing and speaking. Thank you very much. What a great teacher I am. So yeah, so speaking is probably the one that is the most difficult because many people in school here learn via memorization, grammar technique,
Sure.
mostly textbook studying. Yeah, that's the way it is in school. So
Mm.
with the students that you've had, how have you encouraged them, or how have you began to build their self-esteem to be able to have conversations with people?
Yeah, that's a really difficult situation for a lot of people who are learning English because naturally we want to stay in our comfort zone, like we want to use that app, we want to read that textbook, we want to fill in the gaps because that's comfortable, that's what we learned, that's what we know. But if one thing in life you need to learn is you don't gain anything by staying in your comfort zone all the time. Like I only really started growing as a person when I came to Japan and completely changed everything and really uncomfortable, but changed lots about my life. And kind of the same thing applies to English. Like, unless you start doing something new, your skills are never going to have a chance to adapt. And you're never going to be able to experience something new unless you try something new. And the reason you're not confident is because you don't have enough experience doing that thing.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you want to, let's say you want to start learning skateboarding. The first time you stand on that skateboard, you're not just going to be doing like some kickflip or something. It's going to take you a while to like, okay, I've got to spend a lot of time stood on this skateboard and balancing and moving while I'm on it before I can start to feel like, all right, I want to try the next thing. And if you're never speaking English, of course you're going to be worried about it because you've not got an experience in doing it. So with people I generally work with, I try and encourage them like, look, the three main things I tell people is like, A, nobody cares about your mistakes except for you. Like most people will not even notice. And if they do notice, they'll forget in a minute. It doesn't matter. So don't worry about your mistakes. In order to be fluent in a language, you probably need to make 10,000 mistakes. So if you avoid making mistakes, it's going to take you ages to get fluent. But if you make a mistake every day, that's going to speed things up quite a lot. The other things I'd say is like the way that you grade your own conversations. Like I used to do this in Japanese, and maybe you did as well, Stu. Is like, oh, I made a grammar mistake, so I failed that conversation.
Hmm.
When actually it's not a test. It's not a score. Nobody's gonna give you a grade at the end of it. It's like, did the other person actually understand what I was saying? Could I understand enough of the conversation to follow it? Like that's successful. So like this idea of perfection is wrong. Like it's never going to happen. I'm not perfect, and I've been speaking this for like 40 years. So why are you trying to be perfect? Um. So yeah, make a lot of mistakes because nobody cares. The goal is to get the information across. Doesn't matter how perfectly you do it. And the last thing I always do is try and give a safe environment to people. Like, look, this lesson or this course, whatever, is a safe space for you to try new things. If you try it and it doesn't work, I'll show you why it didn't work. But if you don't try it, I can't show you.
Yeah,
So you've really got to, try new things. And I think that as an idea is what I do to try and help people build that confidence. You know.
sure. So I think that thing what you're talking about where you're kind of grading yourself, I think we've been trained to that. It's not
Mm,
something that we would necessarily do. It's not something that we necessarily do to our kids, which is interesting as well, but we definitely do
mm,
to ourselves.
sure,
So the whole thing with the grading, it comes from school, of course, and that we're
sure,
expected to be 100% at whatever we do. And you have to memorize things to get to that level. And we
sure,
then push that onto language because
sure.
it's a subject, or maybe we did learn some of it in school and we tried to follow the same patterns of one way of being taught. And that makes sense to me because something was slightly successful in the past when people have different great ratings for these things, but basically you did learn some English and then you think I need to do the same thing, but actually language is a lot more free. It's not so black and white, and there's many ways to do it. And a lot, if we take an example like work, we don't sit there with a textbook necessarily when we're
Mm,
gaining experience for work, do we? We sit there and we actually experience the thing itself, going through the practices as they happen, rather than just
mm,
studying the whole time. So a lot of people they could go straight into work after their first stint at school without going to university, and they learn on the job. They're not just
mm.
studying. So I think it's applicable to language, so applicable, and getting that mouth moving is important, which sounds like a
Yeah, get that mouth moving, get the muscles working out.
yeah. That
I
could
mean,
that
it's
could
right
be
though. It's
clipped and
like,
that could be clipped and taken out of context. I think
but
that to be
it's
fair.
right. If you want to play guitar, reading a book about playing guitar is not going to get you to play guitar. You've got to actually pick it up and bloody play it. And the same is true. Like language is a thing that we use. So you learn by using it. You don't theoretically learn a language, you practically learn a language. And that's the thing that people get wrong. Because in school, you're theoretically taught a language. Like I learned French from a textbook. I don't remember anything. But I mean, I crap at languages anyway when I was at school. But when I actually came to Japan and I had to use the language, I'm like, oh, that's how you learn a language you
Yeah.
know so yeah, I think people have got the wrong idea about how to learn a language. And it depends on your goal. If you want to pass a test, then sure, get a textbook and do that kind of thing. But I'm not a fan of English tests, so I never really care about that kind of thing. I'm more about like, I want to use it, I want to communicate. English is just a tool.
Yeah.
If I want to build some shelves, I don't really spend ages learning how to use a hammer. Like that's not the point. Like okay, I need a hammer, and that's the tool I'm going to use to build the shelf. Cool. English is the same. I want to meet new people. I want to talk to people. English is just the tool that lets me do that. So I don't need 500 hammers to be able to build a shelf. So why do I need like all this vocabulary? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. I mean, and then many people do get that confused, and they do think
Mm,
that uh you must really study, 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 study. And there is, of course, there's elements of it. You do need to know how to use that hammer, but you
mm,
don't need to be you studying the study guide for using a hammer every time you pick up a mallet to use it. So,
sure.
it's one of those it's one of those things. Like I said, I think it's a taught thing. I think we have to unteach ourselves that, and that's quite difficult to do if you haven't
Mm,
taught yourself to do something before, because it's a behavior that you've acquired over time. And then once you do that, I mean, most polyglots or advanced language learners who have learned more than one language, they're already speaking from day one, and people
Mm.
are worried about making the perfect sentence, and then these guys that can just say hello or how are you or the basic phrases, and they're already trying to start conversations, and
Mm.
they are the people we should be listening to, because
Mm.
those guys actually have learned multiple languages, so they know
They
what.
know what's going on.
Yeah, you don't go to a poor person asking for financial advice, it just doesn't
Yeah.
make sense, does it? And it's the same thing for in this situation. I think that we should be taking on the practices that these people are using who are, learn multiple languages and applying
Mm.
them. I think it's super important. Yeah,
Yeah, me
100%.
too.
And in terms of small talk, what do you think is a good way to help people to push themselves into conversations? Are there any techniques that people can use to feel more comfortable? Because the first few,
Yeah, I mean,
see, you're nervous, aren't you?
yeah, I mean, like even when I was in England, small talk was hard. It's not an easy skill.
Mm,
But when you move to a new country, like, we did, suddenly you've not got that circle around you anymore. Your family's not there, your friends are not there, you're kind of on your own. And suddenly you're like, oh, I need to communicate with new people. And that's tricky. So now small talk becomes important, even though in England I were always like, I don't get it. It's just talking about weather. It's pointless. But suddenly I'm like, oh, I learned it's important. Cool. But nobody really teaches you how to do small talk. It's just
yeah,
like you just naturally pick it up as you grow up. But like I said, I did that small talk success training where I put some frameworks in place to give people strategies to cope with small talk, right? Because it is tricky and it's double tricky in a second language. Like, for example, starting a conversation is very, very difficult. But there's a three-step approach that I always teach people.
mm,
And it follows the acronym ACE, ACE. So A is anchor. You've got to anchor the conversation somewhere, right?
okay,
And usually that's some shared experience. Like if we're both in the same park, that's the anchor. Or we're both under the same weather, that's the anchor. We're both at the same conference, that's the anchor. That's where we're going to start something. And the way you do that is you make a comment about the situation. Like, oh, this is a nice park.
mm,
Okay, cool. So I'm kind of indicating that I want to talk. Then the C is I'm going to give some information away about my feelings. So I'm going to give a comment, right?
yeah,
And the C stands for comment. I'm going to give a comment about the situation. So we're in this park, and I say it's a nice park. I love to spend time reading books in this park.
yeah,
I'm giving some information away about me. I'm showing a bit of vulnerability and trying to pique someone's interest. And then the E is encourage. Encourage that other person to get involved. What do you like about parks? So we've got A, find the anchor, C, make a comment, and E, encourage the other person to get involved. And if you follow those three steps, you can start a conversation with anyone in any situation.
yeah.
It's really, really powerful framework. It takes practice to get good at it, but once you've actually got that down, you can start a conversation with anyone. And that's the hardest part, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, like you say, the most difficult is obviously, beginning that process of having a conversation with someone, and many people struggle with that first step.
Mm,
But I think having, like you say, having some kind of structure in your head that you can fall back on
mm,
is important. And even though it's such a silly thing, really, I feel that any time that we can't do something, we do need a structure or some prep in place, and we to be able to fall to
mm,
go to when we're really struggling, and having that ACE procedure that you just mentioned, ACE,
mm.
it can really benefit you, because really a conversation is multiple versions of that, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, well, obviously there's more questions between each other, but basically it's that format, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that that's a good way forward. How about icebreakers?
So icebreakers are interesting because if you're just meeting somebody for the first time, that small talk is very different to like a colleague that you work with. So if you're meeting somebody for the first time and, that relationship's pretty cold, you don't
Hmm.
really know them, they're quite distant. And the point of an icebreaker is to bring you close together. The point of an icebreaker is to try and find something in common with that person that's not just the park you're in, something on a bit of a deeper level. So with icebreakers, there's a few kind of situations that you're going to find it tricky. But generally, if you stick to things like travel, if you stick to things like hobbies, if you stick to things like what's going on in the current situation that you're both in, eventually you're going to be able to find something that you've both got in common. The best piece of advice I can give for icebreakers is ask more questions than you talk about yourself. Like encourage that other person to talk more. They're probably native speakers, so they're more comfortable in talking. So ask questions. And if you're going to ask questions, ask open-ended questions. Like, don't say to somebody, do you like football? Like, that's an okay question. But the answer is yes or no. It's going to mean that that conversation slows down.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're asking an open-ended question, like what sports do you like, that gives them so much more freedom to actually answer in a way that they can freely express what they want. And the secret is people like talking about themselves and the things they like. So if
Yeah.
you give them that space, they're going to do it. And I
That's fine.
think,
Cool.
yeah.
That's
Sorry, and
why
I think that's like the
I'm
biggest
giving you
thing that
space.
you can do.
Yeah. 100%. It's an important thing to do. Sorry, can you say the last line one more time and I'll stop speaking and stuff.
Yeah, I was saying like, and if you can do that, I think that's one of the best things you can do.
That's why I'm giving you space to talk. You like talking about yourself, yeah? No, I'm
Yeah,
joking.
you've already followed my steps, I see.
That's it. That's it. I knew it already. Yeah, I knew it already. Um, I think one of the difficult things for many people who are wanting to build the, not just have a language partner, but build a relationship with these people. Relationship is it a friendship or something?
Mm.
With people who so they can practice English, is what do they do on the second conversation or the third conversation? Can you have the same
Mm.
conversation again, or how do you keep that like without building, making it? Some people feel like it's weird when you have these random conversations with people. So, how do you? What's the best way to go about these things? I mean, even in our native languages, we do the same process, but
Yeah.
sometimes when we think about it in a second language, it's kind of all disappeared. You don't know what to do. So, what do you think about the second or third conversation with the same person?
Sure. Like, I think in the first conversation, you're searching for that thing in common, that thing that you can both relate about. And that first conversation is a lot of what, what do you like? Which do you like? Where do you like, for example? But I think after that, you need to go deeper. So you need to stop focusing on the what and start asking about the why and the how. Why do they like tennis?
Hmm.
How long have they been playing tennis? How does tennis make them feel? Like the more personal side of it. So you build, it's like building a house. You've got the foundations first, and then you start building, and like you slowly keep going until you've built a full house, right? And by doing that, you've got to keep going deeper and deeper on topics that you've got in common, right? So if our first conversation, you mentioned that you like football, cool. Next time I meet you, maybe I'll talk to you a bit more like, oh, football. Oh, why did you get into playing football?
Yeah.
Like, and then we're starting to go into the history of like the feelings and the reasons. And that's where people will really open up to you. And that's
Yeah.
where you can really connect with people.
So recalling a previous conversation, but
Mm,
it's key, and that's a great idea. Like going a bit more in depth. So if you talk to someone about travel, for example, you talk to them where they visited the first time, and then you finish the conversation. The next one could be like, um, I know you love travel, but what is there anywhere on your that you've got on your bucket list? You know, the place
yeah.
you'll ever get to or something. You know, like this kind of thing can be a good. It's a version of an icebreaker for the second conversation. But
Mm.
then, do you think introducing a secondary topic after
Mm.
that second icebreaker is a good move? Like them bringing in the next thing?
Sure. I think at some point you're going to have to pivot the conversation. There's only so far you can go in a conversation. But the problem that a lot of people have is, especially as like English learners or second language speakers, they are not good at changing the topic. They'll be like, okay,
Yeah.
let's talk about travel. And you'll say, oh yeah, I went to France. But like, okay, cool. What's your favorite color? Like, all right, that was a bit jarring. So it's
It
like
has to
all
be have a
about,
tedious link or something, yeah.
yeah, like pivoting is really important. That comes from uh follow-up questions, basically. So it's a skill that's really hard to learn at first because nobody really explains it to you. But let's go back to this example. You're playing, we talked in the first conversation about you playing football, right? And the second conversation, why did you get into football? Okay, and then you tell me the story of you being a kid and you're really into football and you'd go to Loftus Road or whatever. And then I could be like, oh, I'm not really into football, but I have been to Emirates Stadium. Have you ever been there? Now I've switched from football to places I've visited naturally. And having that kind of, how can I take this thread and tie it to this other thread? How can I link those things together to move the conversation in that direction? And it's basically react to what that person said, give your opinion, then ask a question related to that information. And it can be moving the conversation or it can be going deeper. Either way, that's the skill of the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. I think it's a good example for that would be, so we go back to the previous topic, where do you think is a bucket list place that you've never visited? You would love to visit, but you haven't yet. And then someone said, I'm going to give you two examples. So someone says Fiji, and you know,
Cool.
Fiji, yeah, I'd love to visit there. It sounds so far away, doesn't it, though? It's like crazy. Those guys, they eat, it seems like they eat a lot of food there. They're quite big and muscular. A lot of them are rugby players, aren't they? Do you ever watch rugby? Like this kind of
Yeah.
movement? Yeah. And another good one. So that one is based on the culture or the people in the place, if we're talking travel or whatever, but people are usually a good way to move between topics. So if you talk about celebrity, you could say, oh, but they're also interested in this. Oh, I love movies too. Do you see that Tom Cruise movie? Oh, he's into Scientology. What do you think about that? Like, that's a good way
Yeah.
to move across. But another one is like thinking about recent topics. So, for example, if someone said Iceland and they were like, oh, yeah, Iceland, I'd love to visit there. That looks a beautiful place. You know, you got those really hot springs outside, you know, but it's a really cold place. I think there's a volcano there as well, and be interested to go. Funnily enough, Iceland played England in the football recently, and England lost, didn't they? What did you think about that? And you translate a secondary topic, haven't you? So
That's
it
it.
has
That's
to go.
exactly it.
Yeah, that's it. It has that flow. That's it.
And that was something that I just did that I kind of did on purpose. Is
Mm.
one big mistake that people make with small talk is they kind of jump in before it's their turn to speak. And then both people, especially online, if we're doing Zoom or something, it's like both people don't really know. It's kind of you lose the turn. Like when you play a board game, it's my turn, then it's your turn.
Yeah,
Conversations are kind of like that. But if you go when it's not your turn, it kind of confuses everyone. You get that awkward silence where people, oh, is it my turn? Is it your turn? So yeah, I think it's a skill that also you need to let the conversation breathe a little bit. Like
yeah,
people are so worried about, okay, there's a second of silence, I've got to fill it. Like, no, you can just breathe for a second. Like, maybe they're thinking of something to say. Maybe they're just taking a breath. Like, you don't need to jump in immediately.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
let conversation breathe a little bit. I think that's really important as well.
What was your best tip from this video? Tell me, put it in the comments. But that's it for today. If you want more content like this, check out this playlist. It's certain to help you along your way.